I never imagined I would be the one to cut ties with my own family. If you had told me years ago that I would one day walk away and never look back, I would have laughed in your face. Me? The responsible son? The one who always did what was expected, who played the role of the good child while others stumbled through life without consequence. No, that wasn't me. I was raised to believe in duty, in family, in the unspoken rule that no matter what, blood came first. It didn't matter if I was exhausted, if I was struggling, if my needs had to be put on hold. What mattered was showing up, being there when I was needed. And I was always needed. The dependable one, the problem solver, the son who never let anyone down. My younger brother, Caleb, on the other hand, he was different. He was the kind of person the world seemed to favor without effort. While I was breaking my back trying to make something of myself, Caleb breezed through life with that untouchable air of someone who knew he would always be taken care of. And he was. If there was ever a moment when the line was drawn, when I finally saw the truth of my place in this family, it was on Valentine's Day. The day my parents made their choices so clear, so undeniable, that I had no choice but to finally accept what had been staring me in the face my entire life. They bought my ex-wife a luxury car. Not just any car. A brand new, red Mercedes-Benz, the kind that turns heads the second it rolls onto the street. The kind that tells the world, I am taken care of. I am loved. I matter. I stood there, watching as Vanessa ran her hands along the hood, her mouth forming that perfect little O of delight. "Oh my God," she gasped, turning to my parents. "Are you serious? This is for me?" My mother beamed. "Of course, sweetheart. You deserve it. You deserve it." I wasn't standing in the background, mind you. I was right there, close enough to see the pride on their faces, the sheer joy in giving her such an extravagant gift. Vanessa, my ex-wife, the woman who had left me, the woman who had chosen herself over our marriage, was now the recipient of my parents' generosity. And me? My mother turned to me next, still smiling. "Nathan, come here, sweetheart." For a split second, I thought maybe, just maybe, they had something for me too. Some small token, some gesture of appreciation. I wasn't expecting a car. That wasn't my style, and they knew it. But maybe a watch, a handwritten letter, something that said we're proud of you too. Instead, she placed an envelope in my hand. "There you go," she said warmly. I opened it, feeling an odd sense of dread settle in my stomach. The paper inside was neatly folded, printed with crisp, black ink. As my eyes scanned the words, my breath caught. It was a bill. A long, itemized list of debts, loans, credit cards, unpaid expenses, some in their names, some in the family name. And at the bottom, the grand total. A number so staggering it made my head spin. What is this?" I asked, my voice eerily calm. My mother patted my arm like I was a child confused about something simple. "It's only fair, Nathan. You've always been responsible. You've saved up so much over the years. It's time for you to help the family." My father nodded, his arms crossed. "Caleb doesn't have anything saved yet. He's still getting started. But you've always been good with money." I looked up, expecting, hoping, for Caleb to look guilty, for Vanessa to at least pretend to be uncomfortable. Caleb just shrugged. "Come on, man. You always say you don't care about money." I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. They bought my ex-wife a car, and they handed me their debt, like it was normal, like this was a reasonable, fair exchange. And then I understood. It had never been about fairness. It had never been about love. It had always been about roles. Caleb was the one they doted on, the one they rewarded. I was the one who handled the responsibilities, the one they leaned on when things got difficult. I had spent years convincing myself it didn't matter, that as long as I worked hard, as long as I kept proving myself, things would even out. That one day, I would be appreciated, respected. That moment never came, and it never would. I took a deep breath, folded the paper neatly, and slid it back into the envelope. Then I handed it back to my mother. "Thank you for this," I said. "It's a real eye-opener." She beamed. "I knew you'd understand." I smiled back. Then I turned, walked upstairs, and started packing my bags. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I didn't try to make them see what they had done, because the truth was, they wouldn't see it. Not yet, anyway. They didn't try to stop me. I don't think they fully realized what I was doing. Not then, but they would. Because 2 weeks later, the call started. And this time, I didn't answer. I don't think I had ever been truly blindsided in my life, until that day. To understand why this moment shattered something inside me, you have to understand who Vanessa was to me. We met when we were both young, fresh out of college, full of dreams and plans for the future. I loved her. Or at least, I thought I did. We built a life together. Or at least I thought we were building a life together. But like so many things in my world, the foundation was only solid for one of us. Vanessa wanted more. Not more love. Not more time. Not more commitment. She wanted more things. More luxury, more experiences, more of everything that money could buy. And when I couldn't keep up, she left. It wasn't sudden. Not really. I could feel her slipping away long before she packed her bags and walked out of our home. She started spending more time at events I wasn't invited to, meeting people whose names I'd never heard before, dressing for a life that didn't include me. When the divorce papers arrived, she acted like it was mutual. Like we had both agreed that our time was up. But we hadn't. She had. I signed the papers anyway. She moved on. I moved on. Or at least, I tried. But my parents? They didn't let her go. At first, I thought it was just residual politeness. She had been their daughter-in-law, after all. They had hosted her for holidays, celebrated milestones together. It wasn't that unusual for parents to maintain some level of contact with an ex-spouse, but as the months passed, it became clear that my parents weren't just keeping in touch with Vanessa. They had adopted her. They invited her to dinners, birthdays, weekend trips. I heard about it in passing, from mutual friends, from casual mentions and conversations with my mother. "Oh, Vanessa said the funniest thing the other day. Oh, we saw Vanessa last weekend. She's doing so well." And then came Valentine's Day. I wasn't expecting much that day. Valentine's hadn't meant anything to me since the divorce, and I had no plans. So when my mother called and invited me over for dinner, I accepted without a second thought. I should have known better. When I arrived, the house was decorated like a romantic celebration. Candles, roses, a dinner spread fit for a couple. And there, standing next to my parents, was Vanessa, smiling like she had never walked away from this family at all. I didn't react at first. Maybe I was in shock. Maybe I didn't want to believe what I was seeing. But the moment that truly broke me, the moment they handed her the keys. A brand new, red Mercedes-Benz. I watched as Vanessa's eyes widened in delight, her hands reaching for the keys with the kind of excitement I hadn't seen on her face in years, not even when we were married. "Oh my God," she gasped. "Are you serious? This is for me?" My mother beamed, the kind of smile she had never given me. "Of course, sweetheart. You deserve it." I felt the words hit me like a punch to the gut. You deserve it. For a split second, I wondered if I was the crazy one. Maybe I had misheard. Maybe there was some explanation for this. But then my father clapped Vanessa on the back like she was his pride and joy, and my mother was already reaching for her phone to take pictures. I was still standing there, like a ghost in my own family's home, when my mother finally turned to me. "Nathan, come here, sweetheart." I forced myself to move, to close the distance between us. Maybe there was some part of me that still hoped that there was something for me in all of this. She handed me an envelope. For a moment, I was relieved. They hadn't forgotten me after all. I opened it, and there it was. Not a letter, not a gift card, not even a note of appreciation. It was a bill. A long, itemized list of debts, loans, and unpaid expenses. Their debts, their loans, and their unpaid expenses. And at the bottom, the total amount they expected me to pay. I didn't understand. Not at first. I kept staring at the numbers, my mind struggling to process why. They were handing this to me. What is this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My mother smiled. "It's only fair, Nathan. You've been working hard for years, saving up. It's time for you to help the family." My father nodded like this was the most reasonable thing in the world. "Caleb doesn't have anything saved yet. He's still getting started. But you You've always been good with money. I looked up at them, expecting something, some sign of remorse, some sign of guilt. But all I saw was entitlement. They had bought my ex-wife a luxury car, on credit they couldn't afford, and handed me the bill. And they thought I would just accept it. I looked at Caleb, hoping, praying, that he would step in, say something, anything. But he just shrugged. Come on, man. You always say you don't care about money. I let out a slow breath. Everything became clear in that moment. They had never respected me. They had never appreciated me. I had spent years proving myself, hoping that one day they would see my worth. But in the end, I was just the backup plan. I took a deep breath, folded the bill neatly, and slid it back into the envelope. Then I handed it back to my mother. Thank you for this, I said evenly. It's a real eye-opener. She beamed. I knew you'd understand. I smiled back. Then I turned around, walked upstairs, and started packing my bags. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I didn't explain myself. Because they wouldn't get it. Not yet. But they would. Because 2 weeks later, the call started. And this time, I didn't answer. There are moments in life when everything shifts, when a single event makes you reevaluate everything you thought you knew. For me, that moment was when I opened that envelope. I had never expected a grand gesture from my parents. Not a car, not a luxury gift, not even a public display of affection like they had given Vanessa. I had long since accepted my place in the family, the responsible one, the one who handled things, the one they didn't need to celebrate because I was fine. But even with that understanding, I had still believed, somewhere deep down, that they would at least acknowledge me. A handwritten note, a watch, even a simple, "We're proud of you, son." Instead, I got a bill. I read it once. Then again, thinking maybe I was misunderstanding something. The numbers blurred together, a mountain of debts, loans, and unpaid balances. There was no explanation, no preface, just a total at the bottom. An amount that could have bought them 2 more cars just like Vanessa's. I looked up, feeling my stomach twist. What is this? My mother's voice was light, as if she were explaining something obvious. It's only fair, Nathan. You've always been the responsible one. You have money saved up. I felt my pulse in my ears. This isn't mine. Your family. My father leaned back, crossing his arms. We've supported you for years. Now it's time for you to step up and help out. I stared at him. Supported me? They had never supported me financially. If anything, I had been supporting them since I was old enough to work. From small things, covering groceries when they were short on cash, sending money to Caleb when he needed help, to bigger things, like paying off bills they had conveniently forgotten about. And now, they weren't even asking. They were handing me the debt like it was my responsibility. I turned to Caleb. He was lounging back in his chair, completely unfazed. Come on, man, he said lazily. You always say money doesn't matter to you. That was it. That was all he had to say. No, this isn't fair. No, I'll help out too. Not even a guilty look. He genuinely believed this was the way things worked, that I would fix everything while he continued to reap the rewards. And the worst part? So did my parents. I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing myself to stay calm. And the car? I asked, my voice steady. My mother smiled as if she hadn't just punched me in the gut. Oh, Vanessa's been having a tough time lately. We wanted to do something nice for her. I blinked. For my ex-wife. She's family, Nathan. My father spoke as if I was being difficult. She's been through a lot. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Vanessa had been through a lot? She had left me. She had walked out of our marriage. And somehow, she was the one deserving of a luxury car, while I was handed their financial mistakes. I exhaled slowly, pressing the envelope closed. My fingers felt stiff, my whole body numb. And then I did something I never thought I would do. I handed the envelope back. Thank you for this, I said, my voice completely even. It's a real eye-opener. My mother beamed, not realizing what I meant. I knew you'd understand. I smiled back. Then, without another word, I turned and headed upstairs. They didn't follow me. They didn't question it. Because they thought they had one. They thought they had secured me in my place. The responsible one, the fixer, the one who never says no. But for the first time in my life, I was saying no. I packed quickly, methodically. Essentials first. Laptop, documents, clothes. I didn't need much. Just enough to walk out the door and never come back. By the time I came downstairs, suitcase in hand, my mother finally noticed something was wrong. "Nathan?" She frowned. "Where are you going?" I met her gaze and felt nothing. No anger, no sadness. Just clarity. "I'm leaving." My father scoffed. "Oh, don't be dramatic." I didn't answer. I walked to the door. Still, they didn't move. Didn't react. Because they didn't believe me. Not yet. But they would. Because 2 weeks later, when the bills piled up, when the car payments hit, when reality sank in, the phone calls started. And for the first time in my life, I didn't answer. It's a strange feeling when you realize you've been living in an illusion. For years, I had convinced myself that my family's treatment of me wasn't that bad. That the little slights, the dismissals, the way they always put Caleb and even my ex-wife above me, weren't as serious as they seemed. I told myself it was just how families were. Every family had favorites, right? Some kids got more attention, some got more praise, some got more patience. But in the end, we were still family. That bond meant something. Until it didn't. That night, when my mother smiled and handed me their debt, while my ex-wife drove off in a brand new Mercedes, everything snapped into focus. They didn't just favor Caleb. They didn't just overlook me. They saw me as a resource, a safety net, a walking, breathing bank account. And they thought they could do it forever. I went upstairs, packed my bag, and walked out the door. I heard my mother call my name, but she didn't chase me. My father scoffed but didn't move. Caleb was too busy scrolling on his phone to even look up. They thought I was being dramatic. They thought I would cool off and come back. They thought I would, like always, eventually fall in line and do what they expected. They had no idea. I didn't drive to another part of town. I didn't crash at a friend's place. I left the city entirely. I found a cheap Airbnb 3 hours away, checked in, and turned my phone off. I didn't need to hear their voices, didn't need the calls, didn't need the manipulation that I knew would follow. I sat in the small, unfamiliar room, staring at the wall, letting it sink in. For the first time in my life, I had walked away, and I felt free. The first week was quiet. Too quiet. I half expected my parents to show up at my door, to demand I come back, to guilt-trip me into fixing everything. But nothing happened. I checked my phone only once, just to see if there were messages. There were, but they weren't panic yet. Just casual. "Mom. Hey sweetheart. Where did you go? Call me." "Dad. You're being ridiculous. We need to talk." "Caleb. Dude. Just come back already." I turned my phone off again. I wasn't going back. The second week, the messages changed. They weren't casual anymore. They were desperate. "Mom. Nathan. We need to talk. Please, just call me." "Dad. Where are you? We're worried." "Caleb. Okay. This is getting weird. Answer your damn phone." Still, I didn't respond. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I was done. For the first time in my life, I was putting myself first, and it felt good. Then, in the middle of the second week, I got the first real sign that things were falling apart. An email from my dad. The subject line, "Please read this." I hesitated. I almost deleted it. But curiosity won. I opened it. And there it was, the first crack in their confidence. "Nathan, we're in trouble. We took out some loans we can't pay back. We thought we could handle it, but things have gotten worse. Caleb doesn't have the means to help us, and we thought you wouldn't mind. You've always been independent, responsible. We misjudged the situation, and for that, I'm sorry. Please, at least call us back. Dad." I stared at the email for a long time. Not because it surprised me, but because it wasn't an apology. Not really. They weren't sorry for how they had treated me. They were sorry that their golden child Caleb couldn't fix their problems. They were sorry that I had left, not because they missed me, but because they needed me. I closed the email, and I didn't respond. A few days later, I got another call. But this time, it wasn't from my parents. It was from Aunt Linda. She had never been involved in the drama. Not really. She had always been on the sidelines, the peacemaker, the one who tried to smooth things over. I hesitated before answering, but I picked up. Nathan? Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. I sighed. I know why you're calling. She was quiet for a moment. They're worried about you. No, I said flatly. They're worried about themselves. A long pause. Then, she sighed. They didn't think you'd actually leave, she admitted. They thought you'd understand, that you'd help. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Help? By paying for their mistakes? While Caleb and Vanessa get rewarded. Nathan, she hesitated. They didn't know how to show you they were proud of you. I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. That's not it, Aunt Linda. They never cared. If they did, they wouldn't have done this. She was silent. I wasn't angry anymore. Just done. I sighed. I'm not coming back, Aunt Linda. They want to make things right, she said, her voice softer now. I didn't answer right away, because I knew the truth. They don't want to make things right, I finally said. They just want their safety net back. Another silence. Then, finally, she sighed. Maybe you're right. I closed my eyes. I am. That was 2 weeks ago. And now? Now, my parents were panicking. The car they had gifted Vanessa? They had to sell it. The luxury lifestyle they had tried to maintain? Crumbling. The bills? The debt? They couldn't keep up. And they knew, finally knew, that I wasn't coming back. So the calls became pleading. The texts became desperate. Mom, we're sorry, Nathan. We love you. Please come home. Dad, son, we made a mistake. We'll fix this. Just talk to us. Caleb, dude, things are bad. You need to come back. And I did nothing. Because I had already made my decision. I had walked away forever. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty at all. I've always heard that people don't appreciate what they have until it's gone. But what they never say is this. Some people don't appreciate what they have until they realize they can't use it anymore. When I walked out of my parents' house that night, I wasn't expecting them to chase after me. I knew my place in their hierarchy. They thought I was being dramatic. That I was bluffing. That I would cool off, come to my senses, and come crawling back like I always did. They were wrong. At first, I didn't even check my phone. I didn't need to. I knew what the messages would be. The same condescending tone. The same dismissal. Mom, Nathan, don't be silly. Come home and let's talk. Dad, enough with the theatrics. This is childish. Caleb, dude, are you serious? You're really mad over this? I turned my phone off and went to bed. And for the first time in my life, I slept like a free man. By the second day, the messages changed. They weren't condescending anymore. They were annoyed. Mom, Nathan, why aren't you answering? We need to talk. Dad, you can't just disappear. You're being immature. Caleb, all right, enough. Stop ignoring us. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. They were losing control. For the first time in my life, I had put myself first, and they didn't know what to do with that. A week passed, and that's when the panic started. At first, they tried guilt. Mom, Nathan, sweetheart, you know we love you. We've always supported you. Can't you just come home and talk? Dad, after everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? Caleb, come on, man. This is getting weird. Just call them already. Supported me? They had never supported me. I had been supporting them since I was a teenager. Since the day I got my first paycheck. Since the first time they called and said, we're in a little bit of a bind. Can you help? And I had helped. Every single time. But the second I said no, they lost their minds. By the second week, the calls were nonstop. I checked my voicemail for the first time in days. 36 messages. 36 pleas, demands, accusations. I played one at random. My mother's voice, trembling. Nathan, please, sweetheart. We didn't mean it like that. Just come home. Okay? Let's fix this. I played another. My father, his voice sharper. You think this is funny? You think this is how a son treats his parents? Another. Caleb, exasperated. Jesus, dude. Just come back already. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal. Not a big deal. I let out a slow breath, pressing my fingertips against my temple. The sheer audacity of it all. They had spent years using me. They had bought my ex-wife a car while handing me a bill for their mistakes. They had treated me like I was a resource, not a son. And now? Now that I had finally cut them off? Now it was my fault. Then, at the end of the second week, I got the call that changed everything. Not from my parents. Not from Caleb. But from Aunt Linda. I hesitated before answering. She had never been involved in the mess. She wasn't the type to call unless it was serious. I picked up. "Nathan," she said, her voice soft, careful. I sighed. "I know why you're calling." She didn't argue. "They're worried about you." I laughed bitterly. "No, they're worried about themselves." There was silence on the other end. "Because she knew I was right. They didn't think you'd actually leave," she admitted after a moment. "They thought you'd understand." I rubbed my temples, trying to contain my frustration. Understand what, Aunt Linda? That they bought Vanessa a car while expecting me to pay off their debt? She let out a breath. "They didn't think it would push you away." I shook my head. "Because they think they can do whatever they want of me. Because they think I'll always stay." Silence again. Then, finally, she sighed. "Maybe you're right." I closed my eyes. I hung up, feeling a strange mix of emotions. I thought I'd feel angry. I thought I'd feel vindicated. Instead, I just felt tired. Because this wasn't a fight. This was a pattern. They took and took and took. And I gave and gave and gave. Until I didn't. And now, they were desperate. Not because they missed me. Not because they loved me. But because they had lost their safety net. And they didn't know what to do. 2 days later, I got an email from my father. Subject: "Please read this." I hesitated. I didn't want to open it. But curiosity won. "Nathan, we're in trouble. We took out some loans we can't pay back. We thought we could handle it, but things have gotten worse. Caleb doesn't have the means to help us, and we thought you wouldn't mind. You've always been independent, responsible. We misjudged the situation, and for that, I'm sorry. Please, at least call us back. Dad." I stared at the words. Not because they surprised me, but because they were so predictable. They weren't sorry for how they had treated me. They weren't sorry for choosing Caleb, for favoring Vanessa, for using me. They were sorry that I wasn't there to fix it. And that was the real eye-opener. I closed the email, and I didn't respond, because for the first time in my life, I didn't owe them anything. I used to think that if my parents ever admitted they were wrong, it would feel like a victory. That maybe, one day, after years of putting everyone else ahead of me, they'd finally see me, really see me, for who I was. Not just the responsible son, not just the problem solver, but a person. But when I read my father's email, I realized something. This wasn't an apology. This wasn't regret. This wasn't love. It was fear. They weren't reaching out because they missed me. They weren't calling because they had suddenly realized how unfair they had been. They were reaching out because they were drowning, and I was the only one they had ever relied on to pull them back to shore. I sat on the edge of the bed in my Airbnb, staring at the email. "We're in trouble. We took out some loans we can't pay back." That was the first real truth they had ever given me. They had built their lives on illusions. On the belief that someone, me, would always be there to fix things. When the money was flowing, they spent freely. When the debts piled up, they ignored them. When things fell apart, they handed the problem to me. And I had always solved it. I had stepped up, cleaned up their messes, made sure they never truly faced the consequences of their choices. Until now. Now, I was gone, and the walls were closing in. I didn't respond to the email. I didn't even think about responding, because if I answered now, it would never end. This was their pattern, a cycle I had spent my entire life trapped in. They mess up. I fix it. They promise it won't happen again. And then they do it again, because they know I'll always be there. This time, I wasn't there. And now, they were finally feeling the weight of their own decisions. 2 days later, my mother called again. I let it ring. Then, an hour later, another call. And another. Then a voicemail. I almost didn't listen, but curiosity got the best of me. I put the phone on speaker and played the message. Her voice was strained, shaking with something that almost sounded like genuine distress. "Nathan, sweetheart, please. Just call me back. Please." I closed my eyes, leaning back in my chair. She wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't condescending. She was scared. But I wasn't, because I had finally broken free. A week passed. Then, out of nowhere, another call, this time from Caleb. I stared at my phone for a long time. I had ignored him for weeks. I hadn't even read his texts. But something told me this wasn't another demand. I answered. "Nathan?" His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. I didn't say anything. I let him talk first. He stopped, exhaling shakily. "They sold the car." I sat up straighter. "What?" "The Mercedes," he muttered. "Mom and Dad sold it." I blinked. "They sold Vanessa's car?" "Yeah." His voice was raw. "They had no choice." A slow breath left my lips. The car they had chosen over me. The gift that was so important. The gesture that proved where I stood in this family. Gone. And they had finally been forced to clean up their own mess. Caleb sighed. "They don't know I'm calling you." I smirked. "No kidding. They're freaking out, man." He hesitated. Like really bad. I let his words sit between us, waiting for him to say what I already knew was coming. "They need you, Nathan." His voice softened. "And I think they finally get it." I scoffed. "Get what, exactly?" That they took you for granted." He hesitated. "That they pushed you too far." I closed my eyes, shaking my head. They didn't get it. Not really. If they had, they wouldn't have waited this long. If they had, they wouldn't have needed their entire world to collapse before they realized they had lost me. If they had, they would have apologized long before their backs were against the wall. And that was the difference between them and me. I had walked away because I knew my worth. They were only reaching out now because they needed something. Caleb sighed again. "Look, I know you're pissed. And I don't blame you." "Good. But maybe just come home. Talk to them." I exhaled slowly, pressing my fingers against my temple. "They need you, Nathan." And there it was. Not "we miss you." Not "we love you." Not "we're sorry." They needed me. Because without me, their entire illusion had fallen apart. I shook my head. "I'm not coming back, Caleb." "Nathan." "No," my voice was firm, unwavering. "You don't get it. You never did. And neither do they." Silence. Then, a quiet, almost defeated sigh. "So that's it?" I closed my eyes. "Yeah, Caleb. That's it." I hung up. And for the first time since all of this started, I didn't feel guilty. Not even a little bit. Because for the first time, I wasn't the one suffering from their choices. They were. And maybe, just maybe, that was the only way they would ever learn. It had been weeks since I left. Weeks since I walked out of my parents' house, left behind the weight of their expectations, and decided, for the first time in my life, that I wasn't going to be the one to fix their mess. I had ignored every call, every message. I had let their desperation sit unanswered in my inbox, their voicemails pile up unheard. I wasn't interested in hearing them plead. Not when I knew the only reason they wanted me back was to clean up their financial disaster. And then, one afternoon, my phone rang. It wasn't my parents. It wasn't Caleb. It was Aunt Linda. I hesitated. She had never been involved in the chaos of my family. She was my mother's older sister, the one who always stayed out of the drama, never taking sides, never interfering. If she was calling me now, that meant things were worse than I thought. For the first time since I left, I answered. "Hello? Nathan." Her voice was soft, careful. "I'm glad you picked up." I leaned back in my chair, running a hand through my hair. "I know why you're calling." She sighed. "They're worried about you." I let out a bitter chuckle. "No, they're worried about themselves." There was silence on the other end, because she knew I was right. "They didn't think you'd actually leave," she admitted after a moment. "They thought you'd understand." I gritted my teeth. "Understand what, Aunt Linda? That they bought my ex-wife a luxury car while expecting me to pay off their debt?" She hesitated. "They thought you could handle it." I let out a slow breath, shaking my head. And that's exactly the problem. For years, I had been the responsible one, the fixer, the one they relied on, the one they expected to just handle everything, No questions asked. But no one ever stopped to ask if I wanted that role. They had always assumed I'd say yes. That I'd pick up the pieces, sacrifice my own happiness, and do whatever needed to be done. And I had. Until I didn't. And now? Now they didn't know what to do. Aunt Linda sighed. They know they messed up, Nathan. I scoffed. No, they don't. They know they lost their financial crutch. That's not the same thing. Another pause. Then, finally, she spoke again. Maybe you're right. I closed my eyes. I am. But the conversation wasn't over. Because then, Aunt Linda said something I wasn't expecting. Caleb called me too. I frowned. Caleb? She exhaled. He's not as indifferent as you think. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Please. He doesn't care. He does, she insisted. But he's just finally realizing how much he's taken for granted. I said nothing. Because that was new. Caleb had always been the golden child. The one who had everything handed to him. The one who never had to worry about consequences. So the idea that he was starting to see the bigger picture, I didn't know what to do with that. Aunt Linda continued. He told me he tried to talk to your parents, she said carefully. Tried to tell them that what they did to you wasn't fair. I blinked. He what? I know it's hard to believe, she said, but I think, for the first time in his life, Caleb is realizing that he's always had it easy. That you were always the one carrying the weight. I leaned back, rubbing my temples. Was this supposed to change something? Was I supposed to forgive them now? Was I supposed to go back, fix everything, act like the past never happened? I didn't think I could. And honestly, I didn't want to. Aunt Linda's voice softened. I'm not saying you have to forgive them, Nathan. I'm just saying, maybe it's worth listening. I closed my eyes. Did I owe them that? Did I owe Caleb that? I didn't know. But for the first time since I left, something in my chest loosened. Because if Caleb, of all people, was finally seeing the truth, maybe things were changing. I wasn't sure if it mattered, but I had a feeling this story wasn't over yet. And the next conversation I had, that would be the one to finally decide everything. There's something satisfying about watching people finally face the consequences of their actions. Not because you enjoy their suffering, but because for once, they have to deal with the reality they created. For once, you're not the one fixing it. For once, they have to clean up their own mess. That's exactly what was happening to my parents. And honestly, it was long overdue. It had been weeks since I walked out. Weeks since they handed my ex-wife a luxury car and handed me a bill for their debt. Weeks since I ignored their calls, let their desperation pile up, and finally let them face the consequences of their own reckless choices. And now, they were losing everything. It started with the car. I got the call from Caleb, hesitant, quieter than I'd ever heard him before. They sold the car, he muttered. I almost laughed. What? The Mercedes, he said, voice tight. They had to sell it. I let the words sink in. The gift they had chosen over me. The car that had mattered more than their own son. The symbol of where I stood in their lives. Gone. I leaned back, shaking my head. Huh. That's all you have to say? Caleb snapped. Huh. What do you want me to say? I asked. I don't know, he muttered. I just thought. I don't know, man. I exhaled slowly. They did this to themselves, Caleb. I know, he admitted. I don't think they ever thought it would get this bad. That's the problem, isn't it? They never thought anything would catch up to them, because I had always been there to stop it from happening. But the car? That was just the beginning. The next week, I got another call. This time, from my mother. I almost ignored it. Almost. But something told me to answer. I let the phone ring one extra time, then picked up. Hello. There was silence on the other end. Then, a shaky breath. Nathan. I didn't say anything. She hesitated. Then, we lost the house. I blinked. What? The house, she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Her voice cracked. We couldn't keep up with the mortgage. I sat there, staring at the wall, letting it sink in. The house. The one they had always bragged about. The one they had poured money into. Upgrading, decorating, maintaining a lifestyle they couldn't actually afford. The house where they had chosen Caleb over me, over and over again. Gone. I should have felt something. Pity, sadness, regret. But I didn't. Because they had done this to themselves. We thought we could fix it, my mother continued, her voice thick with emotion. We thought you would come back. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. You thought I would come back and save you. Silence. I had hit the mark. I shook my head. You never planned on fixing it yourselves. You just thought if you waited long enough, I'd come back and take care of it for you. Her silence was answer enough. My father took the phone next. His voice was rough, forced. We were wrong. I let him sit with those words. For once in his life, he was admitting it. We should have never put that burden on you, he continued. We should have been better parents. I let out a short laugh. Yeah, you should have. Another silence. Then, softer. Is there any way we can fix this? I tilted my head. Fix what? This, he said desperately. Us. I sighed, rubbing my temple. Dad, you don't get it. We do, he insisted. We do now. I shook my head. No, you don't. Because if they really got it, they wouldn't have waited until they lost everything to realize their mistakes. They wouldn't have reached out only when they needed me. They would have apologized long before their world came crashing down. But they didn't. And now? Now it was too late. I'm not coming back, I said firmly. Nathan, please, my mother begged. I cut her off. You made your choices. You treated me like a safety net, like I wasn't worth anything unless I was fixing your mess. Silence. You need to figure this out without me, I continued, because I'm done. I could hear her crying now, but for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty. That was the last conversation I had with them. I haven't answered another call since, and honestly, I don't plan to. They lost the house. They lost their savings. They lost their comfort. But most of all, they lost me. And for once in my life, I was finally free.